Okay, we're going to take today's lesson a step further. So part of any kind of math question really is being able to interpret a graph. So yesterday we focused on slope, which we're going to reiterate today. But slope, if you remember, is the steepness of a line, but we find it by completing what's called rise over run. And then you pay attention to which way the line is actually going. If that right arrow is pointed up, it's positive. If that right arrow is pointed down, it's negative. Okay, let's talk about our special cases. Remember, if it's a horizontal line, that's a zero slope. If it's a vertical line, which goes up and down, that's what's called our undefined. Okay, that was yesterday. Oh, I just talked about the 4 types. There you go, zero, undefined, positive, negative. What we're going to talk about today is other parts of the graph. So the one that we stress the most, of course, is something called y-intercept. If you know the definition of y-intercept, this is where the line crosses the y-axis. So you need to know the difference between your x and y-axis. Your y-axis is that vertical line, so make sure you know. But how you actually write the coordinate of a y-intercept is always going to be 0, a number, because the x is always going to be 0 on any point that's on the y-axis. Whereas x-intercept is a line that crosses where the line crosses the x-axis. And just remember, this is that horizontal line. And then it's always going to be prefaced by a number, 0, because anything on the x-axis is a coordinate of 0 for the y value. So if that made no sense whatsoever, let's practice. If we look at number 1, just like we practiced yesterday, let's start with the slope. First, you need to find good points. Again, all you need is 2, like we prefaced yesterday. But this one actually has 3 to choose from. It doesn't matter which 2 you use, as long as you do the rise over run. So for this particular case, the rise is 1, the run is 4. Since 1 over 4 doesn't simplify any further, pay attention to the right arrow. It's pointed upward, so that makes it positive. Now look at the graph. Focus in on the y-axis. Try and circle where it's crossing the y-axis. That's this line. Well, it's crossing right there. But again, how do you write that as an ordered pair? Well, since the x is 0, the y is -1, it's 0, -1. Well, now go circle where it's crossing the x-axis. That's right here. Well, since it's crossing the x-axis at 4, the x is 4, and since it's touching the y-axis at 0, it's 4, 0. And that's what we're focusing on today. So let's talk about number 2. Again, I want to find my own points. Again, I only need 2, so this one has several to choose from. Because when I count my rise over run, I count 3 over 3, which simplifies to 1. Since that right arrow is pointed down, it's -1. Okay? Now, go through and look at the y-axis. I want you to circle where it's crossing the y-axis. That would be at 2. But what's the proper way to write it? Well, if it's the y-intercept, the x is 0 and the y-intercept is 2. Now go and circle where it's crossing the x-axis. That's right there. But because it's crossing the x-axis, 2 is the x position, 0 is the y position. So the zeros are what throw people off about that. Number 3, if I look for some points, here's a good one, here's a good one. When I draw my L, I have 4 over 3. Doesn't simplify past that. The right arrow is pointed up, so it's positive. Now go through and circle where it's crossing the y-axis. It's crossing right there. What's the proper way to write it, though? Is when x is 0 and the y-intercept is -4. The x-intercept is where it's crossing the x-axis, and since it's crossing the x-axis at 3, 3 goes in the x position, and y is 0. So just make sure you know the difference. Number 4, if I look at where it's crossing, I have several to choose from. If I choose those 2, I count 6 over 2, but 6 over 2 simplifies to 3. Since the right arrow is pointed down, it's -3. Circle where it's crossing the y-axis. Well, it's crossing the y-axis right there. But since it's crossing the y-axis at -3, it's 0, -3, because the x is 0. Where it's crossing the x-axis is right there. And since it's crossing the x-axis at -1, -1 goes in the x position, and 0 goes in for the y. And again, it gets pretty repetitive, but I want to skip down to number 7 and 8, because these don't follow the same rules that you're used to. For instance, what did we call the slope of the line when it went straight across? If it's horizontal, remember the slope is 0. There is no positive, there is no negative, it's just 0. But where is it crossing the y-axis? Well, again, that's easy. It's crossing the y-axis at 4. Well, since it's crossing the y-axis at 4, it's 0, 4. Weird question for you. Where is it crossing the x-axis? It's not crossing the x-axis. So when it does not cross the x-axis, in this particular case, there is none. So it is possible for it not to have an x-axis. Well, can you already tell me what's going to happen on number 8? If we remember from yesterday, if the line goes up and down, or it's a vertical line, remember the slope's name is undefined. And then where would it cross the y-axis? Well, this one doesn't cross the y-axis, and it's never going to, so it does not have a y-intercept, but it does have an x-intercept of 5. It crosses at 5, 0. So be on the lookout for those special cases.